I feel like my race really did not impact my educational experience because of my white privilege during public schools.
And I remember being confused on weekends where a lot of my friends that were my school friends would have birthday parties or celebrations over weekends, and I wouldn't hear about them until the lunchroom on Monday. And I was like, well, what, you know?
Legal systems have to change, health systems have to change. There's a lot of systemic racism in each of those fields that have to change before we can really see a large impact. I believe that I was actually fortunate because early in my educational career, I did have the opportunity to have people who looked like me who were instructing in classrooms and also at leadership levels. So my first principal in elementary was a black female. I had black teachers in elementary, so I believe that that actually really impacted me positively a great deal, and I know that that is not the case for most people within the educational field because there are not a lot of black and brown students who are able to see people who look like them inside of their classrooms and in their school buildings.
I learned a lot of my history and culture from my family, not from school, and if I did learn from school, it seemed that it was coming from a point of view of, you know, the white American who wrote the history books, and that's an issue for me. And I wonder, even for the people who taught me about my history, what did they learn in school? You know, what were they being taught by their grandparents, and, you know, what ancestral knowledge was passed down from each person to then affect their education, and what was whitewashed, and what was, you know, what was the importance back then of what we taught our children, and how did that affect me growing up and what I learned about how to identify.
I went from Battle Creek Public Schools, which was a very diverse school where really good close friends were from all races. And in the 1980s, when I came to high school at Battle Creek Lakeview, I really lost the opportunity to interact with students of color. And I still had my friends from my old school, but that transition was noticeable. I remember noticing that as a young middle school / high school student as I changed schools. I went from a very diverse school to a very non-diverse school. That being said, as I became a teacher, I've just noticed that the diversity has therefore changed at Lakeview. There has been a lot more people of color and students of color in the school district now.
Race certainly had an impact on my educational experience. Going to Lincoln Elementary School in Kalamazoo Public Schools, we were a Lincoln International Study School. So it was an elementary experience that we really were kind of infatuated with that, the zeitgeist of the 1990s, which really was the colorblind kind of era, the era of it doesn't matter if you're black and white, and everybody kind of come together in this racial harmony, this melting pot. We studied different cultures. Each kind of classroom had their own culture and their own country to study. We had Spanish instruction daily from preschool through 6th grade. So the topic of race was really embedded in my entire elementary experience, even though I really didn't feel like I fit within any one racial category necessarily. So it really, it was embedded in us at such a young age that we can and should live in a world where everybody's whole authentic version of themselves, including their racial identity, really should be a part of who you are and how we see each other in this world.
So in my classes, I teach a sociology class and I teach AP psychology and macroeconomics, AP macroeconomics. The AP curriculum for psychology incorporates a whole unit on stereotyping, and they talk about implicit biases, they talk about cognitive biases, and stereotype threat pretty significantly. So I tackle race issues in AP psychology because of the College Board's curriculums. In my sociology classes, I have a little bit more liberty because it's an elective that we offer here at the high school, where students can take the class and there's no national curriculum. So I have developed the curriculum over 15 years of teaching, and when we transitioned to a trimester schedule, I broke up the classes, and I teach one class that's called Being Human, and it studies culture and diverse cultures around the world. and the socialization process. And then the other class is titled Race, Social Class, and Gender. And those are the three things that we focus in on. So I have the privilege here to teach a class in a major unit dedicated solely on race, racial issues, racial identity. And we talk about some really great stuff in the curriculum.
Battle Creek Public Schools has really adopted this thing that we call our equity imperative, right? And it's really a call to action that really focuses more on how do we interact as staff members in all of our spaces. So how do we interact, you know, from a principal to a teacher when we're having a coaching conversation, or how do we interact when we're in a in a professional learning community, a PLC, where teachers are coming together that teach the same content area to look at our curriculum through an equity lens. How do we look at through a PSE, or what we call positive school experience meeting, when we're incorporating student voice to say, is this a space that's treating you fairly? Is this a space that you feel like your voice matters and that you have some skin in the game? So our equity imperative is really just us calling and saying, because we know that harm exists, and because we know that harm exists, we're gonna show up differently.
I believe it first starts with showing them what it is, showing them what racism is, showing them what implicit biases are, showing them how what their actions are, how they will impact the students that are in front of them, and then holding everyone accountable by setting expectations of working and operating in a culturally relevant classroom, in a culturally relevant building, and not perpetuating racial stereotypes or criminalizing children of color by exclusionary practices and things of that nature. Understanding the students who you are teaching in front of you, those are the ways that you hold those accountable who are instructing students.
That creates issues when it comes to our school administration, when they are not buying into our concepts and our asks and our needs as a community, such as wanting transformative classrooms that our students can thrive in, where our schools look less like prisons and prison cells and more like thriving environments for our children, like windows, big windows so you can see outdoors, you know, plants and libraries in our rooms. But that comes with funding, of course, and there's a shortage on that, so that can create issues.
I think the unfortunate truth is we have to acknowledge that we are the systemic racism, right? Historically speaking, even in modern terms and our modern reality is that schools have been institutions that have been and continue to be gatekeeper communities, right? Gatekeeper institutions that lock some people out of the American dream and provide direct access to others without responding to each individual's relative closeness to that success, right? So if that post-secondary success looks like college or a career, I think it's our job to first acknowledge that we as institutions, it's a very clean pathway to folks that start 3 feet from the finish line, right? Like if you grow up in privilege and your families are supportive and have resources that can support you preparing for the SAT and can financially support you going into a post-secondary experience of college or a trade school, that really starts you a little bit closer to the finish line, right? You have a much closer you're more closely situated to access and supports and resources. And schools historically have not done a good job with interrupting that, right? Or naming how can we start to plug in some of those gaps while we're also burning the candle from the other side of fighting for social justice, right? So I think in order for us to address systemic racism, our first foundational non-negotiable reality is to acknowledge that we have been the institutions that have caused generational and racial harm to Black, Indigenous, people of color, Hispanic cultures, and start to reconcile with that reality by looking at what are the practices and policies that we have employed in the past, right?
I think one of the hardest things as white educators is when we're accused of something that we don't think we've done, and we instantly put up our defenses. We instantly talk about, you know, are you calling me a racist? I didn't mean that. I'm not a racist. We take it as a personal attack, because I truly believe the worst thing that a white person can be called is a racist. In our minds, like that is the worst thing that can be called. And so when somebody tries to approach us and say, hey, what you did hurt my feelings, and I think it's based because of my race, we have to admit that we possibly could have hurt somebody, embrace empathy, lower our guard, and pledge not to do it again, and then learn what we did that was wrong. And if you establish that kind of culture in the racial dialogue, I think we can make progress. As soon as it gets punitive or disciplinarian, I think that people will just get really defensive and deny possibly that there is an issue.
Tackling racism is not only beneficial for students of color, but it's beneficial for all students and all staff and anybody working within the educational system and the community as a whole, because once you get the groups who are impacted greatly by racism to a point where they're at success and they're seeing school positively, then it's a trickle down. So the school district in itself becomes empowered and has more positive culture and climate and positive experiences, not just for children of color, but for children of all races. And then also you allow children who are not of color to see what racism is, and then they also themselves start to be those people who disrupt and change within their own communities and within their own school systems. So as you celebrate and create positivity for one group, that only escalates positivity and celebrations for everyone across the board.
I'm not sure we have the answers yet as an entire society and necessarily as an institution of public education. What I do know is that when I have tackled my implicit biases as a teacher, when I have started my journey towards empowering and learning about racial equity, I have simply become a better teacher. I have become more compassionate with my students. I have learned more about topics that I thought I would never learn about, that students have taught me about. And I have become a kinder, generous human on a daily basis when I interact with all students, regardless of race, because it is a journey of empathy. It is a journey of empathic learning. It is a journey of understanding different perspectives and different point of views. And I think the best thing that I've done in my career as a teacher is to embrace that journey where I'm not the authority, but we're learning together. And I think that models how we can learn and hear others in the classroom. Is that going to dismantle institutional racism? Maybe. I'm hoping so. But I do know that I'm better off because of that journey that I have taken. It's hard for me to put into words how much it's changed my teaching and how much I feel like I've become a better person because of it.